All right, well, it is time to get going. I know it's a cold day, so thank all you guys for being out. We are continuing on the question and answer series we started a little while ago. And our question today is, are there degrees of punishment and reward that you read about in the Bible? We live in a culture that is incredibly justice-oriented. We understand when somebody does us wrong, and we are mad about it, right? If somebody gives you just a slight, somebody shortchanges you, just a penny or, a nickel or a dime or whatever, you want that dime. I don't know when the last time you used a dime was, but you want it because it belongs to you. And so we understand justice, and we live in a really unique time period when you consider all of human history, in that we have an incredible degree of justice in our day-to-day lives. And that's not always been the case. We live in a country with a really good criminal justice system, and it gets things wrong at times, but by and large, especially considering the standards of the past, it's an incredible system. And people get justice here on earth in their lifetime often. And that's not always been the case. And I think sometimes we take that for granted. When you think about people who lived, 2,000 years ago, and Roman emperor says, I'm going to, take what I want, take your family farm. And well, you have no recourse, right? There's nothing you can do. You just have to suffer the wrong. Well, we don't quite live in that kind of world. We live in a very equitable world now, especially in comparison to all time. But with that said, when we think about justice, and particularly God's justice, we sometimes get a little squeamish, and we sometimes have a hard time talking about God's justice. We like His love, and we like to talk about His grace, and we like to talk about His mercy, and all those are good things, and we need to talk about those things. But God's justice is a good thing as well. And there's a positive and a negative side of it. There's a positive side where, God will rectify the wrongs that have been done to those that have been wronged. God's justice, there's justice for the victims, but there's also justice for the perpetrators, right? And so there's a positive side, but there's also a negative side where those that commit wrongs, those that commit unrighteousness, they will be punished. And you can't have one without the other. We like to talk about the positive side where, God shows mercy and shows grace and gives to us a salvation that we don't deserve. We love to talk about that, and rightfully so. But the flip side of the coin, God's justice demands that sins go punished, and that wrongs meet their own reward. And so, with all that kind of thought, when we talk about God's justice, we think about it's important in our day-to-day lives, but it's so much more important when it comes to eternal things. It becomes eternally, infinitely important, God's justice. And so the question has been asked by a lot of people, and it was asked for this session, are there degrees of punishment and reward? Does God just have blanket sentences, or does God have some nuance in the rewards, that He offers? What do you think? I'll just open up with that. What do you think?
Is this talking about like levels of hell?
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's a good point. So is everyone in heaven receiving the same amount of goodness? Is everyone in hell going to be receiving the same levels of punishment? That's the question. And you brought up, the levels of hell, or the circles of hell. Where does that come from? We're going to talk about that a little bit. Where does that notion come from? Yeah, Dante's Inferno. By Milton, a when was that written? Is that 1500s, something like that? Somebody's going to watch online and make fun of me, but I think it's probably around there. That's a piece of literature, is written in Italian, that's been enormously influential in the way we think about this topic. And we'll talk a little bit about that later. But what do you think? What's your gut say?
I think there is different degrees of hell and or heaven, because the Bible talks about being put in the lowest places of hell. So
Yeah.
it would be the lowest place, it has to be a higher place.
Yeah.
So in comparison, same thing in heaven. People are being put in a higher place in heaven
Yeah.
than others.
So yes, Bible talks about the depths of hell, and you do have some talk about perhaps proximity in heaven, right? Jesus' disciples argue about sitting at the right hand of Jesus and that sort of thing. So maybe. Any other thoughts?
Along with that, Jesus talks about whoever is the least will end up being the greatest. But if that's to do with how close you are to God in heaven versus how your life is here.
Yeah.
Jesus talks about, when he's condemning some of the scribes and Pharisees in the first century, he talks about them receiving, a greater punishment. However, I know from kids that you can do the exact same punishment to different people, and it affects different children differently.
Yeah.
Some things that don't phase one will make the other one fall apart. So.
Yeah. Yeah. Perhaps there's a perspective shift which makes things better and makes things worse. The same thing is not experienced the same way by people. Perhaps that's got something to do with it. I think that's probably a good observation.
I'm not going to shoot for the upper levels of, I'm going to shoot for on the other side.
That's probably a good idea, Irvin. I'm not shooting for the good side of hell. I'm shooting for heaven. So, yeah.
I heard a lady one time say that she would be happy to sleep in a mud puddle in heaven.
Yeah.
And I don't think that should be our attitude. I think we should be trying to get into a big mansion.
Yeah.
Not something that we deserve, but something that God will say, yeah, I'm going to reward you for that,
Yeah. So let's talk about it. What is a reward and punishment? Flip over to Matthew 25. Let's start here. So this is a depiction of the judgment day, where the sentences is going to be laid down. You have two groups. When the Son of Man comes in his glory, verse 31, and all the angels with him, then he'll sit on his glorious throne. Before him will be gathered all the nations, and he'll separate people one from another, as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. And he'll place the sheep on his right hand, the goats on his left. Then the king will say to those on his right hand, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you welcomed me. I was naked, you clothed me. I was sick, you visited me. I was in prison, you came to me." And the righteous answer, when did these things happen? And he says, when you did it to the least of these, you did it to me. And then verse 41, on the flip side, then he'll say to those on his left, "Depart from me, you cursed, into eternal fire, prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, you gave me no food," and so on. And they say, "Well, when did we not do these things to you?" And he says, "Well, when you didn't do it to the least of these, you didn't do it to me." And then verse 46, "And these will go away into eternal punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." And so you have this depiction of there's going to come the day, on the day of the Lord, there's going to be a judgment between the righteous and the unrighteous, and their destinations will not be the same. Up until this point, they're located, intermingled, right? Together. And then he separates them, and then they go to their separate locations. And so the righteous go to eternal life. We sometimes talk about heaven. Well, what is heaven? That might be kind of a duh question, but maybe the more you think about it, the more you go, well, what is heaven?
It's where God is.
Yeah. John given the right answer right away. That's the crux of the issue, is heaven is where God is, right? And there's nuance to that, and you can nuance that in a number of ways. But fundamentally, heaven is the place where God is, and it's described in a whole bunch of ways. It's a place of eternal comfort. It's a place of communion with God. God is spirit, and spirit is not material. And the Bible talks about, we'll be transformed into spiritual bodies and all of these sorts of things. So it's not a physical realm, it's a spiritual realm. But heaven is, in its most basic sense, I guess, it's the place where God is. And as Christians and as, those that love God, that's obviously our goal, right? We want to be with God, and we want to, do the things that He's told us to do so that we might have that relationship, so that we might be able to be close to Him, have that proximity to God. And so some ways heaven's described. John 14, 1-4, it's described as a room in God's house. This is an interesting passage. Flip over there. We'll read it real quick. You may be able to quote it, but John 14, 1-4. Jesus is about to go away. So much of John is, a prelude right up to the cross. And he says, "Let not your hearts be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. In my Father's house are many rooms. If it were not so, I would have told you that, if it were not so, would I have told you that I go to prepare a place for you? And if I go to prepare a place for you, I'll come again and take you to myself, that where I am, you may be also." And so you have this idea of this depiction of having a space in the house of God. This is kind of neither here nor there, but the translation of mansions there is not a good rendering in modern English of the term. When we think of a mansion, I think that really comes from the King James. Our modern conception of what a mansion is different than the King James writer's 1611 perception of what a mansion is. We think of, an enormous house, right? And, just this opulent, whatever. That's not really the meaning of the word here. Rooms is a better thought. And it's a better depiction too, right? We're children of God, and God has this grand house, and you have a place in His house. You're not down the road, you're in the house of God. And I think that's much more personal. And but anyway, heaven is described as being in the household of God. Where I am, you may be also. You have heaven described as a place of comfort and peace. Flip over to Revelation 21. Revelation 21, you have a lot of talk about the new heaven, the new earth, talking about this eschatological or end times reality. And look at verse 3-4. We're just going to snip a couple pieces here. He says, "I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, 'Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be His people, and God Himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death shall be no more. Neither shall there be mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away.'" And so that's a really powerful image. You're in a place with God. God is dwelling amongst His people, and we are in His presence. And the sorrows of life, all the challenges that life has, they fade away. They're insubstantial in the presence of God. Those tears are wiped away. There's no more mourning. You have later, a material depiction of a spiritual reality. And so, John is receiving this vision from God, and, he struggles to articulate these spiritual things in earthly terms. And so that's part of what he's talking about here. But how do you describe something of just incomprehensible beauty and incomprehensible worth? Well, you describe it in terms of the most valuable things we have here on earth, right? And so you look at verse like 10 and 11. He carried me away in the Spirit to a great high mountain, showed me the holy city, Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, having the glory of God. Its radiance like a most rare jewel, like jasper, clear as crystal. Skip down a little bit, look at verse like 18 or so. The wall was built of jasper, while the city was pure gold, like clear glass. The foundations of the wall of the city were adorned with every kind of jewel. The first was like jasper, the second sapphire, the third agate, the fourth emerald, the fifth onyx, the sixth cerulean, the seventh chrysolite, and goes on. But the idea here is, these things that we view as so precious and so beautiful, they're just the mundane, right? In heaven, they amount to nothing. You pave the streets with that kind of stuff. Nobody's looking at concrete and being like, "Oh, this beautiful substance." Some weird people are, okay, but that's not how we are thinking. And the same principle is true in heaven. The glory of heaven is so great that the things that we find most precious, they're of nothing, compared to the glory of being in the presence of God, the glory of heaven. You have it talked about the presence of God once again. Look over at verse 22. I saw no temple in the city, for its temple is the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb. And the city has no need for sun or moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the lamp is the Lamb. This idea of the temple, especially in the Old Testament, is the place that you go to encounter God, right? It's the Ark of the Covenant is there. It's where God dwells. You don't need a temple in heaven because you're in the presence of God. And it's like the sun. It lights up every corner of this place. And, it's brilliant. That's the reward that awaits the righteous. On the flip side, let's talk about what is hell. How would you describe hell? What is hell? Yeah, if one is, in its most fundamental state, the presence of God, hell would be, separation from God. And that's described in a lot of ways too. So it's a place apart from God. It's a place of torment. It's a place of separation. And the Bible uses a whole bunch of different language to talk about it. And the Bible talks a whole lot more about hell than it does about heaven, which is probably pretty opposite from the way we preach and the way we teach, right? We like to focus on the positive, and we like to kind of shy away from the hell topic because that's uncomfortable. But this is what the Bible says about it. It's described as, a place of unquenchable fire. Flip over to Mark. We'll go ahead and read these. We got time. Mark chapter 9, verse 47. He says, and if your eye causes you to sin, tear it out. It is better for you to enter the kingdom of God with one eye than with two to be thrown into hell, where their worm does not die. The word worm there is like the word maggot. Does not die, and the fire is not quenched. And the word hell there is the Greek word Gehenna. It's talking about the trash heap area of Jerusalem. It's just this filthy, wretched place, full of maggots and fire and a pretty despicable type place. It's as far from God as possible. You have it described in Matthew chapter 8 as 8:12 as a place of darkness. That's you see that pretty often in the book of Matthew. I think 3 or 4 times. You see it in 1 Peter. You see it in Jude. Chained in gloomy darkness is what 1 Peter talks about. And you have it talked about a place apart from God. Matthew chapter 7, verse 23. Depart, I never knew you. You have lots of talk about hellfire, a lake of fire for the devil and his angels. All of these things are the description of hell There's some people that have tried to minimize what hell is and say, well, hell is just, you just stop existing anymore. And the Bible doesn't talk about hell that way. The Bible is very clear that hell is a reality, that hell is a eternal reality, and that hell is a place of consciousness. You can't torment a rock. Rock has no consciousness, and so it's a frightening thing, and it should be a frightening thing. So,
Did you ever see the video about 26 minutes of hell?
no,
It's on YouTube.
Yeah.
Look it up. The guy describes it, and for 3 days after I saw it, I was like, man, I wish I could tell everybody to stop doing what they're doing
Yeah.
in their lives.
yeah,
It was unbelievable. I mean, it could be somebody's imagination, but they said that they died. You know how some people
Yeah.
die and come back 20 minutes later or whatever? Well, he was gone for 26 minutes,
yeah,
and he explained what happened in those 26 minutes.
yeah.
Very good.
I'm very skeptical. Well, more than skeptical about those, but yeah.
I understand, but it just gives you a nice picture of
Yeah.
you know.
So, talking about degrees of reward, we'll take each of these in turn. And just to be apparent, I think it's harder to make a case for this one than it is for the other. So, the reward of the righteous is an eternity in heaven. And that's just what it is, right? We don't deserve heaven. Heaven is not a thing that you can work your way up to, that you have earned for yourself. You are given heaven, right? It's a free gift of God, right? And it's not from our own merits. We have to be obedient to the gospel, and we can't just live our lives however we want. And we understand that, and there's a place for works and all of that. Your faith is made alive through your works. But heaven is not a place that you earn. And people talk about, well, I just want to squeak in heaven. I don't like talking about it that way because, but if you are going to talk about in heaven, the least of the saved is just as saved as everybody else. And so I think there's a baseline there. Perhaps there might be some greater honors that are bestowed. Matthew chapter 20, verses 1 through 16 is a illustration about the parable about the laborers in the vineyard. Let's go ahead and read it. We got the time. Matthew chapter 20. This is a little bit long, but it's a really kind of potent parable here. For the kingdom of heaven is like a master of a house who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. After agreeing with the laborers for a denarius for the day, he sent them into the vineyard, and going out about the third hour, he saw others standing idle in the marketplace, and he said to them, you go into the vineyard too, and whatever is right, I'll give you. And he goes on, and people keep coming along throughout the day, and you got some that were there at the very beginning, some that have been like kind of trickling in as the day goes on. And then finally, verse 9, and when those hired at about the 11th hour came, each of them received a denarius. When those who hired first came, they thought that they would receive more, but each of them also received a denarius. And on receiving it, they grumbled at the master of the house, saying, these last worked only 1 hour, and you've made them equal to us and have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. And he replied to them, friend, I'm doing you no wrong. Did you not agree with me for a denarius? Take what belongs to you and go. I choose to give to this last worker as I gave to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or do you begrudge my generosity? So the last will be first, the first last. And so you have a principle here that I think is good, which is, God will do what belongs to him as he pleases. And God has chosen to extend salvation to those that have, been faithful from the time they're very young, worked diligently throughout their lives. God has chosen to extend salvation to those that came along the very last hour, right? God has extended salvation to whoever would receive it. And so for those that have been faithful your whole life, don't be grumbling that this newcomer is receiving salvation, that the same salvation that you have been promised, because God gives as he chooses to give. With that said, I think all will be completely satisfied in their salvation. There are some passages to consider. 1 Corinthians chapter 3, look at verse 10. This is a passage that is often used to talk about the potential reality of some higher levels of reward, or perhaps lesser levels of reward. Verse 10 through 15, Paul was talking here. He says, according to the grace of God given to me, like a skilled master builder, I laid a foundation and someone else is laying upon it. Let each one take care how he builds upon it. Let no one lay a foundation other than the one which was laid, which is Jesus Christ. Now, if anyone builds on the foundation with gold, silver, precious stones, wood, hay, straw, each one's work will become manifest, for the day will disclose it, because it will be revealed by fire, and the fire will test what sort of work each one has done. If the work that anyone has built on the foundation survives, he will receive a reward. If anyone's work is burned up, he will suffer a loss, though he himself will be saved, but only as through fire. And so perhaps that has some bearing on this discussion. It's used to talk about this a good bit. That there's those that have done righteously and have been saved, and their righteousness has been successful. And there's those that have not done as well as they ought, and they're saved through the fires. That they've been saved. It's a passage that comes up a lot. Revelation 14:13 talks about the martyrs, and we'll go there too real quick. Revelation 14:13. I heard a voice from heaven saying, write this, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Blessed indeed, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, for their deeds followed them. And so, perhaps that has some bearing on it as well. Their deeds, the good things that they do, are not just left behind, but have followed with them. Those are basically the passages people have gone to, and I'm less convinced about degrees of reward than I am about degrees of punishment. So let's get to it. What about degrees of punishment? Our thought about this has really culturally been influenced by Dante's Inferno. Dante's Inferno, if you've never read it or don't know anything about it, it's a book that was written, I think, 15th century. I could be wrong on that, 1500s, somewhere around there. But it's a depiction of a guy who goes and he descends down into hell. He gets a little like a tour of hell, and he descends. There's all these different levels of hell. There's 9 levels, and each one has like a different theme. And the first level is like limbo, where it's the virtuous people that just weren't Christians go, and it's not bad, but it's not good. It's just kind of there. You have like the second level is the level of the lustful, and they're blown around by all the winds of like very metaphorical, right? You're blown around by your winds of passion, and they're blown around forever, never finding peace, and on and on and on until you get to the final level, and it's the level of traitors, where Judas is and Satan is, and all of these sorts of things. 13:21. Do it. 13:21. Okay, I was too late. So yeah, so that's been a big influence on kind of pop cultural thought about all of this. One thing that's really worth noting is that everyone who's condemned is condemned rightfully so. God is going to be a just God, and his justice is going to be right every single time. You have passages like Romans 3:23, Romans 6:23. All have sinned, fallen short of the glory of God. The wages of sin is death. It is rightful that those who sin receive punishment. and God will execute punishment on those that have sinned. And so, with that thought, there are some passages that do need to be considered, and I think make a pretty good case for degrees of punishment, at least. You look at Matthew chapter 11, verses 21 through 24. Here you have Jesus is talking about some unrepentant people. And you pick up, "Woe to you, Chorazin, woe to you, Bethsaida, for if the mighty works done in you had been done in Tyre and Sidon, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. But I tell you, it will be more bearable on the day of judgment for Tyre and Sidon than for you. And you, Capernaum, will you be exalted to heaven? Will you be brought down to Hades? You will be brought down to Hades. For if the mighty works done in you had been done in Sidon, they would have remained till this day. But I tell you that it will be more tolerable on the day of judgment for the land of Sodom than for you." And then you look at passages like Luke 12, which is very similar in what it's talking about here. You have a parable of servants that are disobedient. And you have one servant who knows the master's will and has chosen to disobey his master. And then you have one servant who does not know the master's will and has acted disobediently to the master's will. And then you pick up verse 47 or so. Verse 46. "The master of the servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and will cut him into pieces and put him in with the unfaithful servant. And the servant who knew his master's will but did not get ready or act according to his will receive a severe beating. But the one who did not know and did what was deserving of a beating will receive a light beating. Everyone to whom much is given of him, much will be required. And from him to whom they entrusted much, they will demand the more." And so it seems that there's a principle of the more opportunities that have been given to you, and the more truth which you have received, you will be culpable more. And so ignorance does not excuse sin. You know, the unrighteous servant who doesn't know and acted badly despite not knowing, he's still punished. But his punishment is less severe than those who knowingly did what's wrong. And so I think that's worth thinking about. And so the level of truth, the level of knowledge, the level of opportunities that have been given to you will be accounted for in the sentencing, so to speak. Any thoughts about that?
You know, if you look at 1 Corinthians 12, when Paul's talking about, this person that had this, this vision or physical or spiritual experience, saw things that can't be expressed into words.
Yeah.
The Greeks there's like physically can't become words, like it's impossible to describe.
Yeah.
We have this imagery, but we don't know what it's really going to be like because there's not human words for that.
Yeah.
Part of me thinks that, I know some of the most severe emotions I've ever experienced weren't physical pain. It was emotional turmoil, regrets, things like that. And so I think from an emotional standpoint, even on earth, I can understand how, like, if I had a lot of opportunities, or if I had a lot of chances and I still made a really bad decision, I'm going to be a whole lot more tore up emotionally than if something just accidentally happens and I didn't have I have less control over the situation.
Yeah.
So, like I said before, even if the punishment were all identical, if you said, "Oh man, I had so many chances," think of all the times, so-and-so from down the road came to talk to me and I wouldn't listen.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think
Yeah.
it would be experienced differently.
Yeah, and that's a point that a lot of people have made. It could be that with the greater knowledge and with the greater opportunities, you have a greater appreciation for what's been lost. And in the same vein, for those that are receiving a reward, the greater your faith and the greater you've striven and the greater you've worked, the more you appreciate what you've received. And so that's I think a valid argument on both sides. But I think, I still have a little bit of a harder time. I think that there's more possibility open for various degrees of punishment than perhaps degrees of reward. It's kind of my thinking on it. So some final thoughts. We got a couple minutes left. If this is true, does it make God a respecter of persons?
Person as much as of action
Yeah.
and of choice. I think it's more about free will than it is about God picking and choosing. If you don't believe in free will, then yes.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's right. All are judged according to God's word. That's the standard, right? John 12, 48 through 49, Jesus talks about his word will be the standard here. And we are judged according to his word and according to our own actions, our own behaviors. You see that in 2 Corinthians 5:10. We must all go before the judgment seat of God and give an account for the lives that we lived. You see it in James 3. Teachers are held to a stricter judgment. You see it in Matthew 7, 1 through 2, which is, judge not that you be not judged, for with the standard with which you judge, you will be judged. Our actions have a role to play in the judgment that we receive. And so God is not a respecter of persons, but he does, take into account the things that you do. We're all on an even playing field. God cares equally about every soul, but not every soul is going to respond to him in the same way. That's my thought on that. What about, I think we just need to learn to be content with God's justice. We've talked about this for quite a few of these classes. I think that I have got a pretty good idea, and I think my ideas are probably right, and you probably do too. And if there's different, I don't know that this is a, split the church over type topic. I do think that come the day of judgment, I'm just fine with whatever God decides. That's where I'm here. God's judgment is going to be fair, and he's going to do what's right, even when we might struggle with that ourselves, because we're not always right, but he is. And so you think about who God is, and God is a just God. He's proven that over and over and over again, all throughout the Bible. God has been just, and he's been gracious, and he's been good to his people. And so I think we should learn from all the stories of the Bible and learn from what the Bible reveals about the character of God, that God's going to do what's right in each and every situation. And whether my perception of that is right or wrong, I know God will be right in the end on it. And so regardless of your position, I know which side of God's justice I want to be on. I don't want to be, like we said earlier, I'm not shooting for the best slot in hell, right? I'm shooting for heaven. And so, let's just be happy to receive God's grace. And let's not be like Jesus' disciples, fighting over, well, I want to be the greatest in heaven, or I want to be the great. Jesus says, you're not thinking about it the right way. It's not about, being great in heaven. It's about, serving others in this life. It's about being faithful. And if you're faithful, God will give you as he's promised. Any last thoughts? We got a singular minute. Yeah.
No matter where we are, all sinners, and we'll turn from it, we'll repent. God's gonna forgive and forget.
Yeah.
And that's the best part is, we can wonder about all this all we want, but
Yeah.
like you're saying, are you living for heaven? Are you trying to do what's right and trying to repent from what sins we've had?
Yeah.
And that's where God's love and grace.
Yeah.
will forgive us.
And if there's any unfairness that God shows, the unfairness is in your favor, right? You know, it's not fair that you should receive mercy. It's not fair that you should receive, it's not fair that the prodigal son should be welcomed back with, open arms and receive. But that's what God chose to do with what's his. And so he chooses to bless. God is a ultimately just and merciful God. All right. Well, thank you guys. And next week we'll come back with something else.